cloud. So weird.
So
that
weird.
voice is so weird. Okay. Sorry guys, it's like so much to get my screens all set up and stuff. Okay, so let me get that positioned so that you can see it. Okay, you can all see this drawing pretty good, right?
Yes.
Cool. Okay, so up here in my corner, I have some examples of varying line thicknesses. I made all of these thicknesses using just the Sharpies that you guys have in your kit. So it's important to note that you are not by any means limited to the thickness of your actual Sharpie head. You can layer multiple strokes of your Sharpie on top of each other to increase your line thickness. So you can actually get a lot of line weight variation with just these two Sharpies that came in your Art 1 kit. So good to know. So when we are using line weight to show distance, do we want thicker or thinner lines that to show objects that are close to us? Like what's happening to lines as the object gets further away? Are they getting thicker or are they getting thinner? Thinner, yes, they're getting thinner the further away that they get. So it's kind of the same thing when we talked about atmospheric perspective, things start to get hazy, like lines get less crisp. So they also get thinner the further away that they get. So I have just a really rough drawing of a house right here. Yours are going to be way cooler than this, but this is just for my demonstration purposes. And I've got my two Sharpies. These both came in your kit. If you don't have two different size Sharpies, maybe you just have one Sharpie, you lost one or something, you'll just have to go over your lines a few more times to get those thicker ones. But here I have my normal fine point Sharpie, and I have my extra fine point Sharpie. On my drawing, which is now on a nice clean piece of paper, and I have a ruler. So at every single step in this process, we have been using a ruler to keep our lines nice and crisp and straight. Do not stray from that practice at this point. You are still abiding by that ruler. It is your best friend when you're drawing straight lines, because I don't know about you guys, but I cannot freehand a straight line. And I've been drawing for years and years and years. I still can't freehand a good straight line. So we are abiding by our trusty ruler. So in my drawing here, the very, very closest line to me is going to be this one. And that is because when I'm looking at my object, and you can tell this in Tinkercad, when you're looking at your object, this is going to be the corner of the building that I am facing and looking at, which is why my orthogonal lines branch out from that point. So this is going to be the closest line to me. It's also the biggest and longest transversal line. That's kind of another trick to looking at that. So this one, I'm going to make the absolute thickest. So I always think it's nice to start from the closer lines and then kind of work your way out. So I'm just going to take my thicker Sharpie, and I'm just going to go over that line. Now, this is the natural thickness of this Sharpie. But if I want my line to be even thicker than that, all I have to do is just adjust the placement of my ruler a little bit to either side of my pencil line. And I can just make it thicker just by moving my ruler back and forth a little bit. Does everyone see how I'm doing that? I started my ruler so that it was right on the pencil line, and then I moved it a little bit to the left and a little bit to the right And that's how I got my Sharpie line to be nice and thick. It was a lot thicker than the Sharpie line that we started with just the natural thickness. So now I want to decide on a thickness for my other transversal lines here. And when I'm deciding that thickness, I'm trying to figure out how close is it to me on the picture plane. So out of these two lines here, the left line and the right line, which one of these do you think is closer to me in space based on perspective? Which one of these is closer? Is it this line or is it this line? Yes, the left. Okay, so you guys know your stuff. Okay, so the one on the left is closer. So that means that it's gonna be thicker than this one. So this one is gonna be my absolute thinnest line in the entire drawing because this line right here is the furthest point away from me on my building. So I'm gonna take my extra fine point Sharpie and my ruler, and I'm just gonna go over that pencil line. And I'm really taking the time to make sure that my ruler is perfectly lined up because this is not the time to kind of lose all of those really nice line work that you did just because you're going over it with Sharpie. So all of that really nice line work that you did with your pencil, you want to make sure that you can keep that nice and good with your Sharpie. So now I have this line right here is pretty thin. I have this one's really thick. Now for this line, I want to go kind of in between those thicknesses. So I'll probably go back to my other Sharpie for that. Really taking my time to line up my ruler. It's important to note that some of you might not know this, as a little trick. You would want to move your ruler just like a hair away from the pencil line because of the thickness of the marker point is gonna, so you see how if I put my marker right up against my ruler, right now the very tip of my marker lines up with my pencil line. If I actually had my ruler against my pencil line and I hold my marker up to it, the tip, I'll just make a dot to show you guys. That's where the tip is. That's not my pencil line. I don't want to make a line there. So I move my ruler over a little bit from where the actual pencil line is. And I make sure that it's nice and lined up. That way I can actually be on the line. Just a little trick. I don't know. Some of you might have already known that, but maybe you didn't. Okay. So now I have a kind of a medium line, a thicker line, and then a really thin line out here. Now these orthogonal lines are where things are going to get interesting. So our orthogonal line, we want it to go from this same thickness right here all the way to this same thickness over here. So that is going to take a little bit of skilled maneuvering with our handy dandy ruler. So I'm going to start with my thinnest line. So that's going to be my extra fine point. I'm going to start by making this the same thickness as my thinnest line. It's important to start that way because you can always make a line thicker at certain points, but you can never go back and make it thinner again because this is permanent marker. So I'm going to go over it with my thinnest line. Okay. So that looks really weird, right? If I were to just leave it like that, this doesn't look realistic. This thickness should match up with this thickness. Trying to say this thickness 5 times fast. I'm getting all tongue twisted here. But this should match up with this. So if we just cover this, like that corner looks good. This corner looks terrible. So we need to go back into that corner and kind of even this out. So what I'm doing is I'm gonna keep my ruler matched up with this corner right here. but then I'm gonna vary it a little bit out from my line over here on this corner. So now you'll see that I have a gap that's going from this corner and it's gradually going away the further down I get. That is gonna allow my line to kind of like fade out. And I'll just show you what that means, what that looks like. So now I'm just kind of starting to get there. So now I'll do that on the other side of the line as well. Okay. So you see how that's starting to get thicker and then it's gradually getting thinner. So I'm just gonna keep kind of repeating that process. You might have to maneuver your ruler around a little bit to kind of get something that feels right. And it'll just like slowly start to ease into it. So don't try and make like all of that thickness and all of that gradation happen at once, because you might end up getting something that looks really botched. I'll show you a bad example on the bottom line, just so that you can see what that looks like. But kind of really ease into it. So when I am dragging my Sharpie down the line, I kind of start to ease up on my pressure once I get down here, because I don't really want to be adding thickness down here because this thickness is already right. I want to be adding most of my thickness up here at the top. So now you'll see that I have a line that goes from thick to thin. And all I was doing is just keeping my ruler in the same place over here and just kind of maneuvering it along that pivot point. So a common mistake would be to try and add all of the thickness at once. And this is the reason why I'm using the same fine point Sharpie that I used for this line, because otherwise it wouldn't be able to make this nice gradation. So you might be tempted to say, okay, well, I just want to start with my fine point because I can get this thickness really quickly and easily. What happens when you do that is you get a transition that is not smooth. So say I wanted to start with this. Ooh, oh no, now my line's really thick. And what am I supposed to do? So now I have this thin line here, and this line is really thick here, but this marker can't go any thinner. So if I were to just continue along with making that line, now I have the wrong thickness at the end of my line, and that is bad. We do not want bad, wrong thickness. We want the good, smooth transition. So always make sure that you're using the same Sharpie that you used for the thinner line, because you can always use a thinner Sharpie to make thicker, but you can never use a thicker Sharpie to make thinner lines. Okay, so when you're deciding how to vary your line thickness for these interior shapes, you're gonna kind of have to look at what is the thickness of the lines that they're closest to. So this edge of this window right here, that's gonna be pretty much the same thickness as the line next to it because they're pretty close to each other in space. So I could just go right ahead and make that line just like that. But this line, we'd want to show a little bit of space. So this line would get a little bit thicker. So that's going to be the same process that we did with this center line here, where we're just layering two layering. We're just putting two strokes of the Sharpie side by side, and that's making the line a little bit thicker. And then you'll just do this process throughout your drawing. So it's kind of like shading with a pencil. You're going from light to dark, but in this case, we're going from thin to thick. So now this one is going to be a little thicker than this. Now, since we've already done our orthogonals, you can also just look up what is the thickness of the orthogonal at this point. That's going to be the same thickness for this transversal too. So this thickness should match the thickness at this exact point in space because they're the same distance away from our viewer. So I'll just go ahead and try to match that. Very, very important. I can't stress this enough. Work your way up slowly. Don't try to do too much at once. Otherwise, you might end up with lines that are too thick. It's always better to just work your way up gradually than try to do it all at once because you might end up with too much thickness. You can't take that back. So it's kind of fun. It's actually really fun. I like line thickness. And then you'll do that same thing for these lines here. Going from thicker to thinner. Really nice. And you'll just go on doing that for every single line in your drawing. Does anyone have any questions? Do you want to see anything again? I'm just going to keep drawing, give you guys a moment to type in the chat box.
So to clarify, right now, they're just outlining using different line weights for different areas?
Yes, you're not doing any shading yet. That's the hatching that we're going to learn about tomorrow. Right now, you're just going over all of your pencil lines using different line weights according to their depth in space. I don't want to see any lines like this, lines that are not matching up. We should be aiming for this top line here, this nice transition of depth of field. No, it's a big word.
So they're going thick to thin, closer to the vanishing. As they go to the vanishing point, it should get thinner on both sides?
Yes.
Gotcha.
Absolutely. Okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, you guys, 10 being amazing, 1 being terrible, how do you feel about line thickness? Okay. So if you're feeling pretty unsure, something that you can do is just practice first. I know that's like, seems like a silly thing to say because it's like, oh, practice. But you can just draw like a basic rectangle like this and practice going from thick to thin. You actually don't even necessarily have to draw a rectangle. Just go on a blank piece of paper and just see what it feels like. See what it feels like to draw that line and then do the ruler maneuver and go from thick to thin. It's always good to practice before doing things on your final piece of paper because it'll give you a chance to make mistakes and then learn how to do it better. That one did not go all the way. Like do a couple lines like this. See how it feels to vary the line weight with your Sharpies that you have. Okay. I'm gonna stop the recording.